Well, hi everybody. Welcome again to an Internet Association of Australia webinar as part of our Convergent hybrid conference. And this week we're talking about the human behind the hack. It's a rerun of a session that we did in person in Brisbane just a few weeks ago, and I'm sure you'll all really enjoy it. A little bit of housekeeping. This event is being recorded, as you were just told, and we'll be sending out a feedback survey this afternoon. Please fill out that survey and let us know what you think of the seminar, what you think of our events in general, and give us some ideas for improvements, future topics, things like your own member demos or presentations on the projects that you're doing, or perhaps even some peering socials. Whatever you think we should be doing, let us know, please. And whoever does go put in a survey, respond to the survey, we'll go into the draw for one of our fantastic world-renowned mouse mats. In fact, this mouse mat has even been framed and stuck on a wall outside a data center. It's so cool. Excuse me. So please just let us know what you think of things. There is another thing I need to mention, and that is that the board adopted a code of conduct for our events. And basically, in summary, we ask for people to be respectful. Please be accepting and support others to participate in this in the fullest and best way they can. Unfortunately, if people are disruptive, we will remove you, and you can appeal, but we won't readmit you at this time. So another reminder too of our upcoming events. The one we really want to remind you of is the AGM coming up on the 14th of November. There's a list of times listed there for this country that operates on so many different time zones. But hopefully you can join us for that. It will be online to begin with, and then the following night we've got our end of year event. And mentioning end of year events, have a look at our website to get the full details and the dates for our end of year events. Please come along. Yeah, the IAA members can invite up to 8 guests at any of those, and professional members can invite or register 1 guest as well. So come along, they're always fun. So I need to introduce to you Dr. David Lacey. David is fabulous. He really is. And actually, because I'm screen sharing, I don't know if I can properly if I can properly see his bio to read it through to you. He's founder and managing director of IDCARE. He's it's a registered Australian and New Zealand charity. IDCARE provides frontline support to community members who experience scams, cybercrimes, and identity theft events. They're a globally unique support service providing specialist counselling, technical and legal support to victims of identity crimes. David has worked within the identity security industry for over 20 years, was formerly a member of Australia's national law enforcement and security efforts in targeting international syndicates in committing these crimes, and continues to work with industry and governments globally on how to advance response capabilities for customers and staff affected by these events. He continues to research, teach and publish with academic partners. And I can vouch for that, having worked on a project with him a few years ago myself. They're doing some really great research and some really great work just in helping people. And your own ISPs and professionally, you can get involved with them too. So I'm going to hand over to David now to share, and he can kick off with his slides. Over to you, David.
Thanks so much, Narelle, and really lovely to be here, and thank you for an opportunity to share a little bit about what IDCARE does and who we are. I'm going to just inflate these slides for you. I'm coming to you from the land of the Gubbi people, which is where IDCARE's headquarters is based here on the Sunshine Coast. It's great to be home after travelling many weeks to different parts of the country where our wonderful staff are located. I pay my respects to all Indigenous and First Nations Australians, and we do a lot of work across many remote communities, in particular on all things cyber, all things scams and identity response. I'll share a little bit about that in giving you an introduction to our world here at IDCARE. IDCARE has been a labour of love. We're blessed with the people that we have that work and volunteer in our charity, both here in Australia and in New Zealand. They do incredible work and responding to what is just only an exponential demand from the community, which, as you can imagine, has many challenges for us. So our raison d'etre, our mission, is really to provide the best client facing engagement and relief to victims of people that experience cybercrime, scams, and identity theft. The common thread, I guess, for all people that come to IDCARE is that they have concern about their personal credential or account information and or device associated with it. That's kind of the common thread. And people that come to us for all manner of reasons. Many come to us because they've received a breach notification in the mail or on email or text message. So, a data breach notification. Many come to us because they think they might have been involved in a scam. For some people, that scam engagement can have occurred for over 12 months. And I'll give you a case study on that. The most common question that I'm asked is, well, what does IDCARE actually do? What does it do for people? That's a picture of our Sunshine Coast Case Management Centre. We've got a case management centres in Perth, Canberra, Sydney, on the Sunshine Coast here, and in Napier in New Zealand. So what we do effectively is provide an individual, one with a place to go that's safe, it's confidential. We don't really need to know anything about the person to help them. They're invited to give us whatever first name they want to. And obviously, if they're booking a time with the case manager, a way of which we can engage them. So typically a phone number or an email address. We probably are one of the only places that listen. And that's a pretty big part of it, is giving the person an opportunity to really just tell their story. And what our team do, and you can see a picture of them there, is they're performing multiple tasks. It's the most exhausting job within IDCARE is case management, and it's where you have to listen actively. You're recording the conversation in terms of the most pertinent points that the person's providing. You're formulating in your mind what you believe the risk is to that person, which does change. So that's not static, and I'll go to that a little bit later. And then most critically, providing information about what are the response options or needs or actions that can address the needs of that client. For many individuals, there are multiple engagements with their case manager. And in some cases, particularly the more complex cases, those engagements can go over 12 plus months. And I'll give you an example of one of those shortly. So when IDCARE was first set up in 2013, we were set up under the auspices of a national, in Australia, a national identity security strategy. So all states and territories in the Commonwealth agreed to a national strategy. And that was first agreed, I think, back in 2007. By 2013, the policy priority area, and there was only 4 of them at the time, had something along the lines of victim identity recovery. Now, there's no such thing as identity recovery, by the way, but the general flavour of that policy priority was the community needed a place to go to help them respond in terms of their needs, irrespective of where in the market or the system were their concerns or needs, whether it be government credential or a banking account or utility account or even a device issue. So we started really on that basis, and the decision early on was very much, do we stay within government or do we go outside of government? And ironically, it was the government senior executives at the time that were really pushing for IDCARE to not be within government. And the thinking behind that was the community needed a place that's a little bit independent, because whether we like it or not, a lot of the friction that's caused to people that experience these crimes is caused by the response system. So not only are they having to deal with the crime, they have to deal with the fact that responding to the crime is going to create arguably even greater harm. So the wise and the wisdom of the people at the time really said, look, you need to be independent of government. It can't be commercial. It's got to be a not-for-profit, and it's got to be a place that's safe for people where they're not going to be judged. Because back in those days, unlike probably today, you talk about scam victimization, the default position for the community is very much, well, you got to be stupid to fall for a scam, or that's their own fault, or there's no real victim. It's victimless. So there was a lot of stereotypes, probably more forceful stereotypes back then. Now things are changing a bit, not completely, but certainly the conversation's changing. So we've got a government at the Commonwealth level at the moment, which is the first time we've seen, that have said scams are a policy priority for us. So that's new, and that's welcome. It doesn't matter what flag that you fly. I think that's a good thing that governments are acknowledging that this is a problem. I remember, and I shared this with a group in Brisbane, that one of the early meetings I had in Canberra was with a bunch of CISOs, and they said, "Oh, Dave, what do you think is the major cybersecurity threat impacting the community?" And I said, "It's coming through their phones." And they laughed. I thought that was hilarious. And it kind of demonstrated to me that there was just a complete lack of awareness of how a telephone scam can lead to someone's device being compromised. It's enormous. That problem has not been solved by any stretch of the imagination. It is still the largest channel of engagement that cyber criminals and scammers use. I mean, the other thing that's probably remained the same, not changed so much, is government. Government still wraps itself around the axle in terms of definitions of this stuff, and that can be to the detriment of the community. So what I mean by that is, when you look at the Commonwealth, there's particular priorities around privacy, and that's within this department, and there's priorities within cybersecurity, and that's sort of split between these two departments. There's priorities around scams, and that's a separate department. I can tell you Australians couldn't care less about that. They know that they've been harmed and hurt, and they expect a response. And I think that's probably an area that we can improve on, is gripping that up more centrally. And I mean, look, we're only 26 million people. It's not a big country in terms of population. So going back to our work, it is providing that community member with a touch point. It is certainly an online form. We recommend people go through the online form because it gives us an opportunity to obviously prioritise who we need to engage with more readily than others. We have, at the moment, I think we're at around 60 staff. So it's not all staff and volunteers. The volunteer side of IDCARE goes up and down depending on the time of year. So we lean a lot on students, for example, that have an aptitude and an interest in engaging community members with these types of crimes as well. But I guess it's not an unnatural thought as an extension to say, well, if IDCARE is sitting in a very privileged position in getting all of these very unique insights from the community in a largely anonymous way, with their blessing, sharing that anonymously in terms of reporting and insights. So it's the team that's behind me. You can't see it behind the graphic, but the team that sits behind me is the team that monitors all the interactions that we're having with the community, identifying where there might be shifts or changes in criminal methodology that's being picked up by the community, and reporting and writing profiling alerts, which I've already looked at 4 or 5 so far today. They write benchmarking reports, and I've looked at one major bank's benchmarking report in draft today, where we test effectiveness of response and processes around responses to customers. We do monthly deep dive reports. So you've got 3 there on the screen, which is, one's the Da Vinci Code of identity, credential compromise and misuse. So that particular report looked at if these combinations of credentials or attributes were exposed, what are the most common misuse or exploitation that we see at this point in time? And then by extension, are there ways to address that? So when I say we're in a privileged position, that's why we're in a privileged position, is we get to see these things quite intimately. As Narelle alluded to, we do a lot of research work with academia. We think that there's almost a responsibility that we have with that, in pushing, sometimes the ivory tower to do things that are a little bit more applied and practical. And we know that we're seeing a lot of things that could really benefit from sort of academic thinking and time and space, which most of us don't have, but academics do, because that's their life, is to commit time and space to some of these wicked problems. So, for example, we're doing a lot of work with the University of Sydney Cyber Psychology Research Group in understanding what influences people's belief and disbelief of scammers. So that's not only a technical problem, that's very much a systems problem. And there are a whole raft of reasons why people are talking to our case managers about what influenced their belief of a scammer. Spoiler alert, it's got nothing to do with intelligence. So it's not about people being stupid. there are fundamental drivers as to why that's being influenced, and researching that is really important. The other research point that I'll make on that front is we're doing some really leading work with these academics on developing a psychological theory on deception. So a lot of the historical research that's gone on the field of deception has been physical deception, so picking up deception cues of people's face or tonality or responses or reactions to particular stimuli. We're taking that research into a completely new direction and looking at developing a theory, a psychological theory on deception in a scam online telephone environment. Because when you do that, then you can start to develop treatments and test the effectiveness of treatments from a behavioural perspective. So the other thing that IDCARE does that I didn't mention is that we have expert clinics that are psychology clinics, legal clinics, and technical clinics. So these are experts that deliver treatments to clients in those three disciplines, which are the more complex cases that we come across really benefit from. We do things on the darknet, and we were pioneers in that space 10 years ago on behalf of law enforcement. We still do a lot of work on behalf of law enforcement. So we've got the sweetest and most innocent people behind me engaging with the most abhorrent people each day. They don't know who they are, and picking up information about what they're interested in. So, for example, very early on when cyber insurance started to really kick on in Australia after the introduction of the notifiable data breach scheme, we were seeing and involved in chatter that was talking about, let's target those who are insured, let's go after them because we know they're going to pay. So it's kind of those insights that can help feed law enforcement's response and others in responding to this space. And we think we're really serious about it. We do think it's a privileged position we're in, and it's a responsibility we have to devote resources to doing that work. Another piece of work that's I think critically important for us, when I acknowledge contrary before, it's not tokenistic. We do genuinely have a connection with our First Nations people. We take that very, very seriously. We've done this is an old map. We've done 253 clinics in the last 24 months. And those clinics physically visit the community with our cyber trucks. You'll see one of the 79 series there in the background, Sarah. They go to communities, they have discussions about what the community is seeing, what the community is feeling, what the community is saying that it needs. By extension, it's saying to the community, hey, we are here as a national support service to help you. It doesn't matter where in Australia you are. It's there for you. It's free. Often in the community clinics, we will get people say, hey, I've got this on my device, or do you think this is legitimate? And one of the stories I shared with Narelle and the Brisbane crew a few weeks ago was when we were in this remote station in far north Queensland. It was about, I don't know, 12 or 13 hours drive north of Cairns, and Musgrave Roadhouse is its name. And there's no internet connectivity unless you get to the roadhouse, and the roadhouse says, hey, you can log onto our Wi-Fi and make VoIP calls and do things like that. So we'd been out bush for like 5 days, and sitting down on your backsides in a chair at a table eating dinner was a luxury. And as we were getting into our first proper meal in a few days, the lady sitting next to us had on speaker an investment fraudster. And it was just the most, it just said to us, it is everywhere. It is absolutely everywhere. You can be in the remotest place in this country and it will be there. And it doesn't discriminate by location. We focus our work on our CROC program, so our Cyber Resilience Outreach Clinic program, on those communities that we know through our monitoring work experience greater degrees of vulnerability. And we measure vulnerability not just in terms of loss and per capita engagement with these types of crimes. We measure it a lot by how vulnerable are people to experiencing harm in response to these crimes. So things like whether there's a bank branch in town, or whether there's an Australia Post outlet that covers the banks, whether there's law enforcement. To give you an example, it's quite common these days that if you've experienced a cybercrime or a scam or identity theft, a criminal will set up a transaction account in your name. And they'll do that to help with other scam activities or crimes that they're doing to launder money. Now, if you've experienced that and you're not with that particular bank, many banks will say you have to present in branch to have that account cancelled. So if you're at Musgrave Roadhouse, that could be a 5-hour trip away on an unsealed road. That's the impact. So we base our priority around community engagement through our ongoing analysis of vulnerabilities, and that being one. But going back to the human behind the hack, so the topic, I'm not going to talk about REvil or Lockbit or other groups. The human behind the hack content is really focused on that person who's received the notification that their information has been compromised. And you may not have heard about it, but there's been a few breaches involving a large telco and a large health insurer and a large finance company over the last 12 months. And there's been more records exposed in those particular breaches than there are people in this country. Yes, it's great that big business and big government are saying, hey, everyone just call IDCARE. But no organisation can handle that volume of calls. Our work within those breaches was very much focused on, let's get to the people who genuinely believe that because they've been breached, they're experiencing other harms. So crimes being committed, for example, in their name, or there's physical safety concerns they have because they don't want their address known for whatever reason. So we very much were engaged with those three entities to provide that particular service. We did also give some pretty good advice on our website, and a lot of organisations were saying, hey, IDCARE is recommending X, Y, and Z. And that worked really well. We had millions of people come to our website because of that, which was great. There were challenges associated with those breaches, particularly from response system actors, where they were going, well, IDCARE, we don't agree with what you're saying. We want you to say X. And so we kind of really preserve our independence a lot when it comes to that. So part of the work of the team behind me and others in Sydney is to continually test our response system. So if you are the gentleman that you see on this screen, who's just an iStock photo image, but if you're that person that received a notification, then we're walking in his shoes to really experience what it's like to have to respond to these crimes. So our team do that at least every quarter. And there's a library of over 1,500 response actions that we've got and maintain at IDCARE. So we know if somebody set up a cryptocurrency wallet with a particular exchange, we know intimately what that exchange requires of you, and we know intimately whether that's going to be full of friction. Now, we're conscious of what we tell people. You know, we don't kind of bag organisations, but we might say things like, so here's the best response action to that particular scenario with this particular organisation. Bear with it. It might take a bit of time. As opposed to, you know what, last quarter we tested them and they scored 2 out of 10 for their response. That was shit. You know, we don't say that. We might like to, but we don't. So the human behind all of this, and the best advice or observation I have, we've been, I don't know whether it's luck or not, but we've been involved in over 1,000 data breach events, working with incident responders and impacted people. So we get to see both sides. And the ones that work well, if there is such a thing when it comes to data breaches, is where they put the image of that person in their mind when they're making decisions. When you don't, that's when things go off the rails. And it can be really hard for organisations, particularly if you're in government and you've got a minister and you're thinking, okay, what's the minister going to say about this? I need to kind of think about their interests, or the board or shareholders. The moment that that client goes off your radar in terms of the centrality of the decision-making is when you're most at risk as an organisation who's been breached. And we see that so often. So that person behind it, their race starts when you notify. And a really natural thing for many organisations when they're confronted with a data breach is to busy themselves. You're in a crisis situation. It's a hot state. You know, this is not your day job and there's a lot of things going on and you have to make decisions. Often I will say to organisations that you're having to make the best of bad decisions. That's what your life is like now when you're responding to a breach. It's going to be the best of bad ones. And you've got to live with that and accept that and work through that process. it's not a race to notify. You're not done. When you notify, that's when the race starts for the person like that image that you have in front of you. So the person behind that, when it came to Optus, Latitude and Medibank, we had, I don't know whether it's thankfully or not, but it would have been, I think, around 0.003% of people who were notified indicated to us that they believe that there was serious misuse or harm as a result of it. And that's not inconsistent with other breaches. So in other words, most people, when they experience a data breach, won't see or believe that they've experienced other things as a result of the breach. Now, that doesn't make it acceptable at all, by the way, but that just gives you a sense of the volume that we see, typically in response to people coming to us going, hey, Dave, I think, or the team, I think, I got this text message saying I've missed a parcel delivery and I'm convinced it's because of this breach. Or in some extreme examples, it's prolific, and you do see this direct relationship between the two. So don't assume it doesn't happen, it does. And I remember one case, one breach in Melbourne, it was a financial advisory firm. Over 50% of the people who were notified came to IDCARE going, I've experienced bad things. And it was an undeniable connection. And one of those bad things I remember was a person that had an illicit drug import in their name. Their identity was stolen to import illicit drugs, which at that time wasn't part of our response action library. So it then became part of our response action library and working with Border Force and the police about how do you undo this, and how do you ensure that this person is looked after in that particular scenario. So it does evolve, and that's another really key point I think I'd make to you guys is the risk environment unfairly evolves. So if I was to be slightly critical of our notifiable data breach laws and the way we're doing things in this country, it would be we're imposing a regulation on organisations to assess serious harm, yet they're probably the least able to assess it. So that's the first point I'd make. Another point I'd make is there's no real market signals back. So for an entity that believes that they've experienced a eligible breach, i.e. it's reached that serious harm threshold, they're reporting to the regulator. It's not like that there's this transparent view that you can look at all the other breaches that are being reported to the regulator and go, oh, well, they did this, but we didn't do that, or we did this and they didn't do that. So that market signal is not coming back. And that, I think, is to the detriment of the person, ultimately. So that's probably just an observation that I'll have over the last 5 years since we've had that regime. There is no perfect solution, by the way. Every country is doing their own thing. The Kiwis are pretty close to what we do, although the fine in New Zealand, I think, is $10,000. So that's, a good lawyer for a day. There may not be much market deterrence in not complying with the legislation over there, but in Australia, the fines are obviously ratcheted up as well. And there's a lot more pressure, I think, on Angeline and her team at the IAC to look for fines. There's a lot of publicity around that at the moment as well. So it's not easy. I'd also just sort of come back to the work that we're doing on the psychology of this. So just touching on the scam side of it, when I say that it's got nothing to do with intelligence, it has a lot to do with getting people in a particular emotional state where they're going to respond without thinking. And it's about creating an artificial crisis. So it relies heavily on heuristics. So a heuristic is effectively you're taking action without thinking, and you're taking action by corner cutting. And we do it every day as humans. So when we're driving in a car and we see something, we go, oh, that's what that's going to do. So I'll just do this. You don't wait for the thing to unfold. Like, you're heading into a roundabout and somebody hasn't got their indicator on to exit or turn right. You might take action without them actually turning right. So that's a heuristic. We cut corners, and we do that as humans all the time. It's a very primal thing. It's trying to get you in that hot state. There's been some emerging literature on this, and we know what the dominance of that amygdala or that other part of your brain is, which is not the logical, rational thinking part of your brain, which is great for deception detection. So when your frontal lobe or your neocortex is engaged, that's the one that detects cues of deception. When your amygdala is engaged, that's hopeless. That doesn't detect that at all. It's about reacting. It's about fighting or flighting or freezing. That's that part of the brain. So there's a real psychology to this. And in all the work that we do, one of the things that we're really trying to get a better handle on is how much tunnel vision plays in people's behavior when it comes to deception and scams. And so if somebody was to ask me who is the most common investment fraud victim, what's that demographic look like? They would be typically people identifying as male, 55 years plus, who are experienced investors. And it might sound counterintuitive that they're experienced investors and they're falling for an investment fraud. And part of the reason why we think that's the case is that they're using a lot of heuristics, i.e. I'm leaning on my experience, I'm cutting corners, I'm making decisions without necessarily thinking through, which lessens my ability to detect the deception. And equally, I'm singularly focused on an outcome. So all of us, either ourselves or within our family and friends, will know people like this who are very task-oriented and very outcome-driven. Unfortunately, those people are actually more susceptible to being scammed. So we have a test that we run in our community clinics called the Scambulance test. And it's a kind of a gamified test where we get to throw scenarios at people, and what spits out is a score of their ability to being scammed or their ability to detect a scam. And we've had over 2,000 people do this test, and the ability for the community to detect scams is about 8%. It's incredibly low. So when you read, for example, the literature on email phishing in the workplaces, phishing tests, I think one study I read even this morning was saying it's not uncommon to get a hit rate of around 20 to 30% of staff will click on the phishing email, which is a socially engineered attack. And there's a lot of advantages, obviously, if you're doing that for your organization because you know your organization, but that's where that's at. So in other words, 70 to 80% don't. Whereas what we're seeing with deception and scams is 92% can't detect it. Like that's just profound. So I'm often put in a position where they go, well, what's your best advice? I don't have any best advice because I know how scams work and I know how deception works. And if anything, I don't think there is a slap campaign for this. I don't want to sound negative, but in all of the cases that we see, and it's hundreds of thousands of cases, and we ask the question, what influenced your belief and disbelief of this? And I say this in the context of data breaches too, because often the greatest risk to the community with a data breach is that they will be scammed. You know, the criminal may not have enough information to commit identity theft, so they might want to have a shot at you through deception. So that's why it's connected to this topic. So the one message that I have for you that you'll probably forget, which is completely fine, is just stop and think and ask others. That's it. Like if you do that, 90% of the people that engage us across the community that have experienced a deception crime would not have gone through with it. And that's so much easier said than done. And the reason why that's so much easier said than done is that if I'm a criminal and I can email or text or call 15 million Australians without spending a dollar, which is what the technology allows, there might be 1% of that 15 million people who are in the middle of a conversation with the brand they're impersonating. They are so good at what they do, and the plausibility of the deception is really high. So when I say I can't really tell you anything that's going to make a difference, the only thing that I hope would is this, and sharing that with your family and friends is just to say, look, whenever I get that, I ignore it. Or whenever I get that, I just go, well, is this real? I'm going to make my own inquiries, you know. And sadly for many, if they don't do that, that costs them their life savings, you know, and relationships. And sadly, we see that every hour of the day. If you want to know more, there's a QR code. There's no malware link to that QR code, by the way. You can just scan away and feel free. Or if you don't want to do that, you can just go to idcare.org. Doesn't bother me either way. But I really appreciate, Narelle. Thank you, Internet Association of Australia. Thank you so much for having me talk with you and the team today. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're truly, David, you are very, very welcome. I think the more we can do to promote your work, the happier I'll be. And I think many of our members would actually appreciate knowing more about the sorts of services that you offer. Indeed, at the session we had in Brisbane a few weeks ago, one of the attendees just sat there gobsmacked going, oh my gosh, now I know where to send my customers that are facing this sort of thing. Now, we did have a question, and I neglected at the beginning to remind people what to do with your questions along the way. Please, if you've got any questions, folks, post them into the chat or use the Q&A if it's working. We've got one here that says, my husband had a call from someone last week who said they were from HSBC, likely knew that he had a HSBC account and were phishing. He saw through it and blew it off. How much is going on like this that just isn't reported, do you think?
Oh, heaps. I reckon we would see less than 10%, which is really scary because we've had over 200,000 phone calls this year. So I know the ACCC. So I should have explained, if you fill out a ScamWatch report, you'll typically be given the opportunity to say, would you like an IDCARE case manager to call you?
Wow. Yeah.
Or if it's the same with Report Cyber. So we've done a lot of work over the last 12 months to make sure that no matter where you go, there is an opportunity for you to connect in with our team.
Yeah.
Having said that, look, we would see less than 10% of it, I reckon, easily. Most of the people that come to us, which sort of blows the mind of some of our government friends, I think it's less than 10% of people that come to us have gone to Report Cyber or ScamWatch.
Mm-hmm.
So that's unique in a way. We encourage people to do it. We certainly encourage people to put in the Report Cyber because whether we like it or not, getting a police report number, or in Report Cyber it's called a CIRS number, is a form of currency when you have to respond. So people will go, well, have you been bothered enough, Narelle, to report to law enforcement? Oh, I have, I've got this number. They're more likely to believe you and help you, unfortunately. That's kind of just the currency of the day. ScamWatch is great to do because ScamWatch is terrific in terms of broadcasting and messaging. We don't have a prevention team. We can't. It's not within our swim lane, and we're focused on obviously being the emergency room of the hospital. So ScamWatch is the resource to really know what's happening, to try and craft national messaging through government. So I encourage people to go there as well.
And ScamWatch is an ACCC service, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And
ACCC.gov.au, or it's scamwatch.gov.au.
I think so, yeah.
But I'm sure you can, dare I say, use your favourite search engine to find it, and hopefully it's the right one. Oh dear. Let me just see if there's any more questions. But folks, I really encourage you to ask them here. David's got some tremendous expertise, and hearing about it, I think, is wonderful. Yeah, he also mentioned volunteers. You've got a volunteers program, haven't you? How do people get involved with your volunteer program?
Engagement at idcare.org is the email. We're working with one of the university providers at the moment to do a bit of a micro-credential on effectively case management. So people that are interested in doing case management can enroll to do a micro-credential. They get a university certificate or award, and then we take them through with that. We actually teach the course, but we take people through what it's like to be a case manager at IDCARE. It covers a lot around incident response. So we're really trying to target organisations that have people that have been identified as part of their incident response team and do want to do this course where we get to share our insights of being involved in over 1,000 of these things, but also with a view to saying, well, we've done the course, we've exposed you to this. Do you want to volunteer and do some corporate volunteer days at IDCARE? So, yeah, engagement at idcare.org is the email to send the email to. We do a lot of work with students. It seems every semester we've got students on placement as well. We had 2 students from University of Western Australia this last semester. The first piece of work they did, they were computer science students. So the first piece of work they did was on ad cloaking. So ad cloaking is a technique that criminals are using to effectively bypass the robotic vetting that the search engines or social media companies have. And then once it sails through that, they flick the switch and it turns into a scam ad. So we had 2 students coming in from University of WA, and they spent the first few weeks just researching as much as they possibly could on how ad cloaking works, and went to the minister's office with the report. And they've gone, wow. What a great
It's a fabulous
Good place when that
experience
was.
for a student. Yeah. So we've got another question, and that is, do you think a government-run digital ID system, as MyGov is trending towards, is going to help?
Yeah, great question. I think I can't remember whether they covered it off in Brisbane or not, but there's this great quote from Mark Twain when he came to Australia in the 1890s. So this is the author of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. And he came to Australia in the 1890s. He caught a train from Sydney to Melbourne, and he wrote that he got awoken by lantern light at 1 or 2 in the morning and told to disembark from the train as they broke the gauge. And he said, this is a paralysis of intellect. The fact that we've got 2 different gauges that connect Sydney and Melbourne. What we already see at IDCARE is a degree of a paralysis of intellect. So firstly, we're always going to be in this position where we've got not just MyGov ID, but we've got Australia Post ID, we've got MasterCard's got an ID, we've got Connect ID that I went to the launch with in Sydney a few weeks ago. So we've got multiple IDs. New South Wales government has one, Queensland will have one. The most critical thing that government Canberra can do is to ensure that there is a consistent standard and an accreditation process around that, which is what they're doing. So that firstly needs to happen, because there is digital ID and then there's digital ID. So we've got to make sure that there are minimum standards here. And that includes things like proofing, and that includes things like how do you ensure that people in remote communities actually have access to this stuff.
Well, or if you're elderly or don't have a driver's license, you don't have photo ID.
Yeah. And so all of those things need to be part of a regime of accreditation and standardization. Otherwise, the Wild West will just run. And so the problem that we have at IDCARE, if somebody was to say to us, hey, has digital ID reduced identity theft? No, it's actually gone in the other direction. And I think part of the reason why that's the case is that we're dealing with twin track economies at the moment. So in some respects, it was only ever going to make a difference if it was one in, all in. But because it's not, and because there's multiple, and because we haven't got necessarily a standard rail gauge at the moment, we're actually seeing the worst of it. So I think in some respects, time hopefully will be a bit of a healer. But there's some pretty fundamental building blocks that need to be put in place first before we see that.
Is it possible, though, if we do get a more consistent approach, that will just become the honeypot that ups the ante and people target that even more?
I think it's going to come down to
Australia's just very wealthy, and they think we're a great target.
Oh, well, definitely. I don't think that's going to change. I think how elevated that honeypot risk becomes will come down to the design of it. So there are wonderful technologies that are coming onto the market and already exist where you actually don't need to share the details to get some assurance that Narelle is Narelle and Dave's Dave, where we don't have to create a central honeypot to store that information. So there are capabilities and technologies that exist to enable that now, which is terrific. Once upon a time that didn't exist. So I think that's going to be part of the standardization and accreditation of this. One of the fundamental building blocks I spoke about before is the analog system. What's in this thing in my wallet?
Oh yes.
Is really built on a pack of cards. So there's the non-digital ID world that's still pretty open to exploitation. And if a digital ID is in part relying upon that particular world, then you still carry with it some degree of risk.
Yeah, there really is an awful lot of risk, and the quality of scam emails that I get in a deluge on a daily basis, they are just getting better and better. Yeah. And even if you're checking your email whilst on the phone, sitting on the bus, or somewhere you hit a bump, you can actually click something very easily. I think we can't really stress too much how easy it is to be taken in by all this. And so your figure of 8%, I've got to do this Scambulance test. It really sounds interesting, but I mean, it's awful, the impact that this has on real people's lives. And I think the work that you're doing is just phenomenal. One thing you also mentioned at the last session was that you're talking to remote communities, to Aboriginal First Nations communities, and hearing that in some communities, they don't even have a word for scammer in the traditional language.
Yeah.
And yet, if you that to me presents such a phenomenal situation to not even need a word for this thing. And yet here we are in English. We've got scammer, shyster, crook. Like we've got probably 10 or 20 words for that sort of thing, haven't we? At least.
Yeah, language is a huge part of it. And it's so easy for us that live in cities and big regional centres to just not even consider that. And I went to a town that was on the border, it was on the fringe of the Simpson Desert in June, and not far from Alice Springs. So it wasn't a huge distance. And the road in there from the Stewart Highway into the particular community was just terrible. You couldn't drive a sedan, right? So we were heading in to do a community engagement. A family waved us down probably about 40 minutes out of the town, and they had shredded their tyre, and they were driving a Ford XR6. This tyre was shredded, like there was no plugging it or reinflating it. And the reason why it's shredded is because the road was so bad, you wouldn't be able to tell when the tyre popped. So you would have kept driving. And so that's why I shredded anyway. So we stop and get out, and the immediate confronting thing was that talking their First Nations language. And the person was explaining to me English was their fourth language.
Yeah.
And so language is a huge thing. So it's so easy for me to go, oh, just go to ScamWatch. We'll go to Reports Over. Well, it's not in language. You can't use AI at the moment to pick up the 14 dialects in the Nullarbor in East Arnhem Land.
No.
So it is a huge limiting factor. And that particular engagement that the team had in East Arnhem Land, they were talking about passwords and password managers and long and strong and all that good stuff. And the team were reflecting that one of the community members said password means pass the word. And passing the word in that particular community was working for Norforce, which is working for the government to look at illegal boating and illegal activities at the top of Australia. And they were educated to pass the word, pass on the messaging. So it's that's the fundamental. That's where we're at. If we're genuine about every person in this country mattering, how do we ensure that the communication's accessible? Big thing.
Yes. I remember a while back doing some materials for consumer information about telephones for people in First Nations languages, and that was the first time I think anybody had seen it. And I believe it's still being played on radio stations.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. Well, have we got any further questions? I'm just prod people a bit because I think we could probably wrap up if we don't hear any more. Have we got any other questions, folks? This is your last chance. We'll certainly put links to the materials on our website and our YouTube channel. So we'll post this shortly. It'll probably get a little tiny edit just to get out some of the noise, I think. We'll post it as soon as we can. So
I'll
this is your
make the final point, Narelle, that I think it's easy in these topics to come away really negative and feel a bit despondent. I think if it's any consolation, I've been working in this environment for many years, and I've never seen it in such a place where there's such a willingness to want to do things and to collaborate across industry and government. And I'm really buoyed about that. I think if there's ever a moment in time where we collectively look to change things, I think it's now. So, yeah, encourage everyone listening to get involved in some way, shape, or form if you're not already.
Yeah, well, that's a great note to end on, I think. So once again, thank you, David. We really appreciate you spending the time with us and sharing your thoughts, telling us all about the great work that you're doing for IDCARE. I really, really do. And please keep it up, because if by some misfortune it ever happens to me, I want your help.